I'm delighted to be joined by David Wynne to hear the story of the 1925-1926 League of Ireland season, which is a subject that he has researched an awful lot in recent months. David, thanks so much for joining me here today. Just before we focus on that particular season and the events of 100 years ago, perhaps you could just help set the scene by discussing what the League of Ireland looked like in the early 1920s and sort of why it was created. So just the whole early 1920s period of Irish football.
So the League of Ireland in the 1920s was still kind of the formative years of what was the Free State League, which had formed when partition had arrived in the country around about 1921. The league itself, or the origins of it, came about when Shelbourne were due to play an FAI, as it was then, an Irish Cup replay, and as tradition dictated at the time, if the first game was held, say in Belfast, they were playing Glenavon. And then that game had been a draw, so tradition dictated that the replay would be held in Dublin, but Glenavon refused to travel for the replay, and that brought about a fracture in Irish football, with the Irish Free State breaking away and creating their own league, which began in 1921-22.
In terms of what the league actually looked like, so there's a league table here we have in front of us, but just for anybody would be interested in what teams are still around 100 years later, or what teams maybe have fallen by the wayside.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of flux in that early league. So in the 1921-22 edition, you would have had Shelbourne and Bows, I think, are the only teams still surviving from that. Shamrock Rovers joined the league a year later, won it in their first season, and then you would have teams moving in and out over the next couple of seasons. So by 1925-26 you were left with a league which featured Shelbourne, Shamrock Rovers, who were the reigning champions. They'd won the league twice in those first 4 years, and they'd won the treble the previous season. That's the league, the cup and the shield. Then you'd have Bohemians as well. Fordsons, who were a team from Cork. They were a factory team based out of the Ford motor factory down there, named after the Fordson tractor that they produced. St James's Gate, who'd won that inaugural Free State League of Ireland title. They'd also won the cup that season. Athlone Town, who were the first team in the Free State League from outside of Dublin. They also won the cup in 1923-24, knocking Shells out en route to that title. Jacobs, who were another factory team based out of the Jacobs biscuit factory. Bray Unknowns, the forerunners of Bray Wanderers. They had joined the league the previous year. Pioneers, they had been in the league since 1922-23 and would end up propping up the table for most of that time. And then finally the newest team in the league were Brideville, based in Inchicore out of Richmond Park.
So I'm looking at the league table from that season, and so the first thing that immediately caught my eye was that there was a points deduction. It says here 2 points awarded to Fordsons from Bohemians. So there must have been some type of controversy.
The game between Bohemians and Fordsons were awarded the points after they appealed on the basis that the Bohemians player Harry Willits, one of the best known players in the league, was listed as Henry Willits, and in a ruling that kind of harkened back to the bad old days of the league, and one that would even make Ollie Byrne blush. Fordsons appealed that and were successful, so that kind of put the end to Bohemian's title challenge, but put Fordsons right in the mix.
Yeah, because I'm looking here. So Bows ended up finishing fourth that season. Fordsons finished third, and I think Fordsons, a lot of teams hate going away to Fordsons. I think during this period going down to play in Cork. But if you look at the top, then it's Shelbourne. Shelbourne ended up winning the league title. There was 10 teams in the league. They all had to play. You had to play each other home and away. So it was 18 games per season.
That's right.
And 2 points for a win?
2 points for a win back then, yeah.
Yeah, instead of 3. So Shelbourne ended up winning the league, finishing ahead of Shamrock Rovers by 2 points. And this was Shell's first ever league championship, wasn't it, about 100 years ago?
Well, that's right, yeah. And I mean, in some ways that was a little surprising, not to sound entitled as Shelbourne should win a league, but they had been amongst the favourites each of the first 4 seasons. They had been the preeminent team in Dublin, and it was mostly a Dublin-based league. Before the split, they had won 3 Irish Cups. They'd won the Shield, which was the secondary competition played after the league season, which was essentially another league season, although rather than home and away, it was just played at home. They'd won that twice, and in their 30 years they'd won 10 Leinster Senior Leagues to that point, 11 Senior Cups, 5 Metropolitan Cups. When they competed in the Irish League, they had won the Belfast City Cup, which again would have been the equivalent of the Shield. It was played in a league format despite its name, which was the closest they'd come to winning a national title in those years. Even though they were competitive in the Irish League, they never won it, but they did win the Belfast City Cup, and they did win the Leinster Senior League in the war years as well, and that would have been the highest title they could have competed for, because the Irish League was suspended. But it was a real gap in their Roll of Honour that they hadn't won any national title up to that point. They'd finished runners-up in the Free State League a couple of times, but they hadn't really challenged. They finished 4 and 5 points behind on each occasion. So this season, it certainly started out looking as if they were going to continue that pattern of not winning the league.
Yeah, because even I was just looking at some research that you've carried out about this season, and Shells obviously would have gone in as one of the favourites, as you mentioned, alongside the likes of Rovers and Bows and Fordsons, but they didn't have a very good pre-season, and the first game of the season, things weren't going to plan early on.
That's right. I mean, they had a friendly game before the start of the season with Shamrock Rovers. Usually those games between the sides were quite close. Rovers won that 6-0, so it certainly was an inauspicious start to the season. And then their first game of the season was away to the newcomers Brideville. So they were obviously expected to win that, and found themselves 2-0 down at half time, and it was only thanks to a comeback inspired by Val Harris that they got out with a 3-2 win.
Yeah, and Val Harris, I mean, he's somebody that I'm aware of. I gave a lecture about his sort of remarkable footballing career and life a few years ago, but would Val Harris have been probably like Shell's best known player at that time?
Oh, I think certainly. I mean, he would have been one of the best known players in the league at that time. He at this stage of his career, he'd played over 400 games for Shelbourne, 60 plus goals in that time. He started out as a centre forward, and then he moved to the half back line. But he had 20 international caps, Remarkably, he was 41 years old at this time.
And he was crippled as well, wasn't he? Like, more or less.
Indeed, he'd played in England with Everton for a number of years, but his knee injury put an end to his career in England, and he came back to play with Shelbourne. He was in his 16th season with the Reds, and was also, I think, player manager at this time. He'd certainly done stints as player manager before, but yeah, he was certainly crippled. This was in many ways his last dance. He would play one more season after this, but only as an emergency backup. Probably played more often than he would have liked in that season as well, but this was really his last season and possibly his final chance to win a league title.
Yeah, I suppose back then it was a different type of game in terms of, like, there was no subs. Teams all sort of played with a 2-3-5 formation. It was a different type of football. But Val Harris, it was a bit of a sort of a superstar at this time. And just from looking at the research you've done about this season, it looks like Shell's season really began to kick off a few games in when they brought in some very important new signings.
Well, that's right. I mean, after that first victory or first game, it looked like they'd got things back on the road with a 4-1 win at St James's Gate, but then they had to make that long trip to Fordson's and were hammered 5-1. So at that point, some big changes were made from a team that had largely been the same as the one from the season before. So they brought in some new signings. They brought back Fran Waters, who had been with Shells previously and who actually scored the goal for St James's Gate in that game against them. So he'd end up scoring against and for Shells in that season. He formed the centrepiece of a forward line along with a player called John Simpson, who arrived around about the same time. So between them, they scored, I think, in almost every game of the season, one or the other. Often they were scoring multiple goals. Simpson, we don't know too much about him unless I'm missing something completely. I think he may have signed from a Leinster Senior League team, Blackrock Hospital, but he certainly had the season of his career that year, and he'd go on to score in 7 consecutive games and be top scorer for the season with 18 goals. But perhaps the biggest names they brought in were Pat Robinson. He was a ex-Distillery player. He'd I think played in the Gold Cup final against Shelbourne back in 1914. He had a couple of international caps and previously been with Blackburn Rovers and Linfield. He was, as they would say, a tricky winger. He'd also tried his hand in America before joining Shells with a team called Brooklyn Wanderers, and he would occasionally spend summers, I think, playing in the States before returning to the Reds, and he'd be with them for 4 seasons, I think, winning a couple of titles with them.
Which is quite unusual, a player going to America
at
this time.
There was a few players at that time. There seemed to be some sort of formative American league at that stage. So there was a few players from Shells, Rovers, Bows and teams in the north that were going over and trying their hand in the US. But many of them would end up coming back to the league. And then the biggest name of all, I think, that they signed was Sam Russell. He was a Northern Irishman born in Downpatrick. He too had played for Distillery and had signed for Newcastle United in 1920, and he became part of the Newcastle United team that had that won the FA Cup in 1924. So he played a few matches early in the campaign, but he didn't play in the finals. So I don't think he would have been awarded a medal as he would have been these days. But he was certainly the star player at the back for Shelbourne.
So some new signings definitely boosted Shell's title hopes that year, and I suppose I can see here that Shell's had a huge win over Shamrock Rovers, which was a real sort of scalp to have. They beat Shamrock Rovers. It was the first time Rovers had been beaten in a long time.
That's right. It was probably the turning point of the season. They took on a Rovers team that hadn't been beaten, I think, for 20 months, so it was 26 league games, and in a real back and forth battle, Shells took the lead for Rovers equalised, went ahead, and Shells equalised again, and then late in the game Shells got a free kick that was taken by Mick Foley. And it was one of those free kicks that kind of went into the box, evaded everyone, and ended up in the net, putting an end to Rovers' unbeaten run and sending Shell's top of the table for the first time. At this stage, I think Rovers had moved to Milltown, but I think both matches that season were played in Ringsend, just because of the demand.
So it was very much like the Ringsend derby, as it was always known, in the early years, and some people still refer to it as. And then also Shells had a big match against Fordsons, which was considering Fordsons were challenging for the title that year, and it's unique because you were showing me that there is actually newsreel footage of this particular match, so you can get a glimpse of what the League of Ireland really looked like back then and what it was like to go to a Shell's home game in sort of 1925.
That's right, yeah. So in the run up to the game in November between Shelbourne and Fordsons, Shelbourne had slipped up, drawing 2-2 with Brideville, and that allowed Fordsons to leapfrog Shells at the top of the league. So it was a massive game in Ringsend then between Fordsons and themselves. So the newsreel cameras were there, and there's still some footage available showing the teams emerging onto the pitch and some action from the game, which does give a sense of what the League of Ireland was like back then.
Yeah, because I always loved those old newsreel clips of football matches, because you'd always see that the crowds were always enormous. You'd notice, the kits of the players, the long shorts, the style of football was obviously quite different, and the cameras would always be based behind one goal. So, if the goals are at the other end of the pitch, you wouldn't see them. And I think even in that newsreel footage, I think was there 6 goals that day?
6 goals in that game,
and you don't see any of them.
One of them, yeah.
You don't see any of them in the 80-90 seconds of newsreel footage. So, people back then, when they were looking at these clips, these newsreel clips of games, it was a bit of a lottery whether the camera was in the right end of the ground or whether it was actually even turned on at the time the goals went in. So Shells, that was a huge win over Rovers, huge win over Fordsons from Cork, and they went on a terrific run, which put them sort of in pole position towards the end of the season.
Well, actually, they slipped up straight away after going to top of the table from beating Fordsons again. They dropped some points very surprisingly against Jacobs.
Okay.
They only drew 2-2 at home with them, which allowed Rovers then to take over at the top. So it was a real three-way battle at that stage, although Fordsons' race was probably run. And then both those teams went on winning runs, so that when they met again in December with just 4 games left in the season, it was an even more crucial game. Like the first game, it was a bit of a ding-dong battle, with Shelbourne, I think, taking the lead, going 2-1 down again. And then they equalised through Paddy Kavanagh, who was nominally a fullback, but had been filling in as a forward. He'd scored a couple of goals to win the game against Bows the previous week, picked up the equaliser that kept Shells in the title race here against Shamrock Rovers, and then moving back to full back again the next week, he scored again in a victory over Bray Unknowns that set up the title run-in with the last 2 games.
And then it all came down to the final day. So just like when Shells won the league couple of years ago in 2024. If you go all the way back to their first title win, took place on the final day of the season was when they clinched it. It was Saturday the 2nd of January 1926. So right after New Year's Day, the new year 1926 had just started, and Shells had a very difficult game. They were away to St James's Gate.
That's right, yeah. Well, just to set that up, Shells were actually behind Rovers in the table going into the last couple of games of the season. They were a point behind, and on Stevens's Day 1925 they were away to Athlone Town, which again was a difficult trip. They had been beaten by Athlone in the Shield the previous year, so it wasn't guaranteed. They would have taken the train down to Athlone. They came back with a 4-1 win. Val Harris scored what I believe was his final goal for Shelbourne in that game. And when they arrived back to the station at Broadstone, they would have found out that just a mile down the road, Rovers had been beaten by Bows 2-0. So Shells had gone back top of the table at that point, which set up the final day game against St James's Gate. Again, another tricky away fixture for them. But unlike up in Derry in 2024, it was a little more straightforward. Shells got the early goal, and they got 3 more as well. One in somewhat controversial fashion, where Fran Waters was said to have handled the ball in the lead up to the goal, but they were comfortable winners 4-1, and it meant that Rovers' game against Bray the following day didn't really matter. Shells already had the title in the bag.
So a convincing 4-1 win to clinch the league title, and there was, according to one newspaper account, there was around 8,000 people sort of packed into the ground.
That's it. It's certainly a far larger crowd than would have been expected, I think, for that game.
And there would have been an awful lot of pressure on that Shells team, that day, considering this was the first time that they'd won a league title, like a national league title, and they knew that if they slipped up, potentially they could have let Rovers in.
Oh, exactly. I mean, Shells, I think, would have felt they had to win that game. Rovers were away to Bray, who were towards the bottom of the table, so would have been expected to win that game. Back then, matches weren't necessarily played at the same time on the same day as they are now, so Shelbourne were playing St James's Gate on the Saturday, knowing that a win would give them the title, but that any slip up and Rovers would probably get ahead of them, or at the very worst there would be a test match to decide the title if the teams finished level on points. So
we could have had a Ringsend derby to decide the winners of the league.
Yeah, certainly. That would have been a match with a lot of pressure on it.
So basically, so the Saturday, the 2nd of January 1926, and a very important date in the history of Shelbourne Football Club. Well, David, thanks so much for joining me today.
Pleasure,
and I'll have
James.
to talk to you again about the League of Ireland, the history of the League of Ireland in future. All the best.